There we go.
Hey, welcome to the August 11th Policy Committee meeting. Playing the role of Tiff Police today while she's on an airplane coming back from vacation.
Awesome.
And I think one thing, just order of business, I did let Byron know that he might be able to zoom in with us.
Okay.
Anything to say about anybody, so just keep an eye on it. He didn't answer me and he did see that information. I told him he was welcome to pop in if he had a minute and had something to share. So just maybe we keep one little eye on that.
And if I assume we'll switch to AI, then at that point.
Oh, of course, yeah. So just minor house code key.
I don't see anybody.
Yeah,
there, but
he might not.
If you see something pop up, just let me
Okay.
know.
So we want to start with the spring policy memo, Patty?
It's just for information purposes only. There are a number of policies that came out with the spring update from the New Hampshire School Board Association that will require, revisions, and we will get to those, as time progresses, but that's just something, for your information. There are some in here that are boomerang policies. They keep coming back because we're tweaking and we're tweaking and we're tweaking. So, one of the ones though that I was wondering if we could push up out of order, because right now it's listed as letter C, is the JICK bullying policy.
Okay.
If we want to just move that up and maybe we can do the cell phone one and then the bullying one, or however Lisa wants to do that, but that one is, there are some substantial changes that a law went into effect August 1st, so I just wanted to flag that. We found out about that at the beginning of the month, so
Okay.
that's not in the spring memo because it was August.
Okay.
And I just want to comment too, I do really appreciate you. Good job reviewing these policies.
Thank you.
I'm impressed with how well you know.
Thank you. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Definitely is.
So good for you.
Thank you.
Okay, so how about this, just because if we don't mind going out of order?
Yep.
Can we consider starting JICJ, the
Yep.
cell phone personal device policy?
Yep.
What happened, I know people have been copied on emails, like way too many emails, but basically we wanted to try to get this updated in time for school to start. It will go to the board, assuming nobody has questions today. In this committee, it would go to the board tonight, first read. And we'd have to do a second reading at the next board meeting, but assuming there's no major flags at the board tonight, I think it would be pretty reasonable for administrators to start the year, assuming that this is going to be very quickly enacted in short order. I mean, if something major gets raised tonight at the board, then we can always decide how we want to pivot accordingly.
Yeah.
All of the changes in that policy are in red and they reflect feedback from the principals, and Zach has reviewed it. So one of the main changes there was to end the use of personal laptops and MacBooks. One of the changes we had talked about in policy previously is whether we wanted to also ban smartwatches. And Chris Tebow at the high school raised some concerns about just operationally, how would you know if it's a smartwatch or if they're like wearing long sleeves or whatever? He just didn't want to be in the business of having to do, risk searches and trying to police that. So he would prefer to start right now from the position of we expect students not to be fiddling with them during the day, but we're not going to remove them or get into it. And then if there's a problem, maybe handle on a case basis. And it also spells out more intentionally that each building can set their own procedures for discipline and exactly how they want to collect devices.
I did have a question on
Okay.
that part.
Yep.
So I wondered
What
why.
line are you on if you have a question?
Oh, I'm on line 17
Okay.
and 18, which is what you just referred to. Procedures established by individual controls. I guess what I was wondering why typical procedures that are common just to ensure more consistency, so that why would we have why would we have like possibly three just very disparate approaches in three elementary schools? I don't understand.
And it's more of the developmental levels. It's not the three elementary schools separated. Elementary is going to be handling them one way, middle school, high school, sort of a
Right.
different approach that way. So we.
But I can see each, but this says individual schools, which suggests that each elementary school could be very, very different. And I fully understand that the high school, middle
Mhm.
school, and elementary wouldn't, it makes a lot of sense to me that those would be different. I guess, can we phrase that in it? Because I do want some consistency.
So-
Obviously flexibility, but
Agreed. And I think that that's something we're taking a look at across several policies to try to do exactly what you're talking
Okay.
about. I think if we want to make changes to this language, I had talked this through with Zach because it's unusual to have something go to policy in the morning and to the board that same night. So this is what's in the board packet. If we want to change the language, you can just say, what is the language that you want to add or change?
okay,
And then we have to introduce this with an amendment with that new language tonight.
that's,
So I'm looking at it. I mean, I think Patty operationally, we have a lot of policies that we're sort of adding this language. It says it will be the same across the elementary schools. And that still leaves them flexibility to say we want a policy for fifth grade that's this and kindergarten that's different, because that could definitely be true.
mhm.
I don't know, were you part of those conversations with you?
So I
Feel
just pulled up so that I could remember the exact conversations. Elementary is pretty much, everything's off and away. You are in class, you don't have wearables, you don't have any of that. It's off and away, smartwatches included.
Mhm.
Middle and high school are looking at the, am I checking your wrist kind of a thing? A little bit more of a responsibility on the student. Trying to make sure that they also have, if that's their only way to tell time, kind of a thing, whatever it might be. But elementary, pretty much it's off and away. And middle and high school, trying to be careful about how much time are they spending looking at risks compared to having the conversations with students about other things that might be better well served spending time on.
I mean, I'm not gonna, just to comment on the wristwatch, what I understand about the telling time pieces, aren't there clocks in every classroom?
There are,
Yeah.
there are for that.
So I don't.
But they've also got, there are students who, and this would fall under the specific exception, is students who are using it to manage medical
No,
things
that's
like
under
that.
section C though.
Yeah.
And so is IEP, so they need it for a system tab.
So it seems, honestly, the argument for telling time is kind of weak.
Mhm.
I do think, I think it's more realistic to say it's just really hard, adds to, it's more challenging to implement.
Mhm.
However, I guess, because it seems like now you've got all these kids who can walk into the hall and you've told them you can't talk on a cell phone in the hall, but if they have a watch, they can talk. And
Correct.
I
However, as another anecdote, they did not have, reading from what Phil Davis shared, they did not have issues with them with the smartwatches last year. I know from talking to Sean Donovan, like the watches were not a big thing last year.
Okay, I think the fact that we're just saying we're gonna watch this and we'll change it if we need to is fine with me.
Okay,
I mean, and I want to respect the principal's wishes on this, and they're the ones who have to implement it, and frankly, implementing this is really hard, so I'll support that.
So one thing we could do to potentially address your concerns in the future is we could always consider in some policies, we just add a standard line at the end that says the procedures will be shared with the board annually. So we're not telling them what those procedures are, but we can get them. And if we see at that point that New Franklin's over here and Little Harbor's over there and Dondera's over here, then we could always have another conversation about, do we want to update the policy? If that's helpful to sort of satisfying some of your questions about how they implement it, like that's not a big deal.
no, that might already be in section E, line 43
It
about,
says the superintendent shall review and recommended policy changes go to the board. It doesn't say the board will get a copy of the procedures.
okay,
So that's the only question. I'm wondering if you have a concern about, are they gonna all be implementing the way they monitor stuff in the same way?
Well, it says for policy changes to be delivered to the board.
Right, but that's not us seeing the procedures. That's just Zach, if he reviews it all and decides he wants to recommend a change, he
Okay.
can. I don't know if we need it, but if we want to add it, it's not a big deal. I mean, I'll have those things in place, so that wouldn't be a burden for them to share.
Yeah, I guess going back to the earlier concern I had on line 17, 18, I'd like to just amend it so that each school level shall be determined by each school level. And high school, middle school, and elementary.
And is that something we're saying, bring up tonight so that we can make the change?
100%. So here's what I'm just gonna do. I'm gonna just make this as clean and simple as possible. So I think we would make an amendment. Quickly. Okay, so cell phones. I would say. We could just add, because you want it to apply to everything, not just to cell phones. So I think we need a new paragraph. So we could just add in that line 21, a new one-line paragraph that says restrictions. And
How about there will be common procedures at the elementary level?
all three elementary schools.
And that just needs to sort of principal set the tone and say, this is how I want to do it. That's the only thing.
Will be identical. Across all, if we just say procedures will be identical across all three elementary schools, is that
Will
covered?
be common, because I don't, they don't have to be identical,
What does common mean? What's the difference between common and identical?
but they don't have to be exactly word by word, but they're.
We might have different names for different rooms, different, like, if a teacher isn't calling, a cubby holes, something like that's, I think,
For me, it gives a little more flexibility.
Okay, I'm just not sure what common. Okay. So you just want to say procedures will be common.
Across all three elements.
Okay, I think that's fine. Does that satisfy
That's
your
totally.
concern? And Todd, does that feel in keeping with what the admin team was saying they're
Yep.
doing anyway?
and
So I would just say we're gonna add when we amend and introduce tonight.
Tonight, okay.
A separate paragraph on line 21. It just says procedures. Will
That's my concern for this.
Perfect. I think that's pretty simple, Steve. And then if we need to, revisit it partway through the year. I mean, I definitely don't love doing this one in August. Like, I think if we know the changes are coming, this was just one that we probably should have tried to do in the spring. But whatever, we're here. Okay, so if that works, I've got that in here. So that will need to be an amendment tonight when we introduce it for second reading. This was how it was put in the board packet. Is there anything else on this one, Steve, or do you feel?
I'm comfortable.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that, I'm not sure if it's perfect, but I feel like this is closer to what people wanted, and if we need to even go at it, again, we can.
Oh, I'm sorry, and then I mean, I guess. The only question again, if the watches do end up being an issue. This will get revised to reflect that increase in need.
I think that that's fair, and I do think with this one, we might not want to change it in the middle of the school year.
Oh.
But there's no prohibition on them being, restrictive in the way the policy is written. So if they decide from a procedural standpoint that they also want to ban them bell to bell, this doesn't stop them from doing that. It just doesn't require them to, right? Because it just says, shall follow procedures established by the school. The school could choose to establish procedures that say, keep them out of my school. Or they could say, wear them anywhere you want, but they have the room to do it. Okay, cool. No, that was a good change. Okay, so that one is going to go to the board tonight for first reading with that amendment. And then I think, let's just go back to the beginning for JLCD, and medication policy. I'm gonna throw a wrench in the works on that one, Patty. So I know we have a memo from the nurses on proposed changes to that language. We
Mhm.
had some RSA updates that we need to address.
Mhm.
I have some concerns on that one about the new language being potentially burdensome to parents and encouraging kids to miss school that I'm not comfortable with.
Mhm.
Okay,
And I think this might be one where it would be better to schedule either a Zoom or in-person conversation with Karen or one of the other nurses so that they can maybe make us better understand their concern. Because I think the language that we're adding that says they should stay home, I just worry, it just feels much less nuanced than I would like. And that's a switch from just notifying the school if your kid needs to take medication to say, keep them home for a day. And I just worry about the burden on
that
families.
sounds like a legitimate,
Um,
because we want to do, is get to reduce absenteeism.
And it may be that there's some nuance or there's some particular situations. Like it's one thing if you're taking a brand new, really, like weird antibiotic and you suddenly have an allergic reaction. And I completely understand why the nursing staff would say, geez, we wish we'd known that this kid was allergic to this medicine before you dropped them off for school today. But for, a routine cold or, they're taking Tamiflu for the first time, I just worry that we're keeping them home.
So we will reschedule this one for maybe our next meeting and invite the nurses.
I would almost want to do two meetings out because our next one is September 1st, which is
That's gonna be Zoe.
very early in the
And then
year.
have half the school in their office.
Kindergarten first day is the day
Yeah.
before, so it could be
But there's things to do.
zoacious. Yes, it could be a little zoacious. So we could, the
Wait,
15th,
Cindy, so September, if that works for you, Patty, and if we need to do it for October, that's fine too.
I will reach out to see if the 15th works.
The 15th, it's not. I won't be here, but that doesn't matter. I mean, you can certainly do it that time and then you'll just review.
And it would be first read too, so you'd have a chance still to.
Right,
Wait.
leave. Don't get back.
Okay.
True.
And is the next one October 6th or one of these in my mind? I don't know.
6th.
Okay,
Okay. I don't have
okay.
a trip on my calendar.
And so that way, we're not having a knee-jerk reaction to it, and we can hear what they need and then
Yep.
make those changes, because that seems better than trying to guess. Okay, so now you get right back to JICK.
Yes,
Um,
which we had this come to us from the New Hampshire School Board Association because there have been changes to laws
Okay.
that go into effect August 1st. And in the NHSBA sample policy, one of the notes that they do include if you look at the sample policy, a specific note in bold right there in the middle. Because substantive provisions of the amendment take effect on August 1st, such that they should be in place by the beginning of the school year, and HSBA recommends that boards waive the reading and adopt the policy at the earliest meeting after August 1st. So the changes are that they want some of the bullying education in curriculum. So they've added that. They have changed some of the wording around false accusations, and they've added false accusations to the retaliation provision. Talked a little bit more about examples of cyberbullying, talking specifically about what is doxing, what is cyberstalking, what is catfishing. So there's a lot more in the way of definitions in there. And then they talk about who is required to report. They have included bus drivers, coaches, contracted consultants, folks who provide services. So if we are contracting with a second party for speech and language services, for instance, and they hear that there's bullying going on, they too are required to report so that we are aware. False accusations, like I said, have been added. We've got the districts to district reporting and how that needs to be handled. And what that needs to look like, how parents need to be notified, when the reports need to be sent out what the investigative procedures need to be, which would be important for all of our administrators. Talks about, again, cyberbullying, recording on buses, which we talked a little bit about last meeting. And then superintendent or designee, doing any kinds of extensions to investigations. So for instance, because this never happens, but if you find out like the Friday before a vacation and you have an X amount of calendar days, that doesn't really take into effect the fact that you're not there. What the investigation needs to look like has changed. That's part G. So that's going to be important for our administrators. What happens as far as interventions, remediation, and disciplinary consequences for students who have substantiated instances of bullying and how that has changed. And then this is the big part is bullying prevention education. At the beginning of the year, I am always making sure that our staff is aware of this policy and they're going to be reading the policy and taking a short quiz on it. So I want to make sure that they're reading the correct policy and what they need to do for that. But also, in addition to having it in handbooks and things, there will also be lines 430 and following. No later than December 15th, the superintendent shall cause a report or a link to a report on how the policy has been integrated into the school's curriculum, discipline policies, behavior programs, and other violence prevention efforts. So there is a requirement for this to be seamlessly integrated in those areas. And that link has to be provided to the Commissioner of Education, Chair of the State Board of Education, the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and members of the House and Senate.
But it says the following two sentences may be deleted from this policy anytime after March 15th, 2027.
Yep.
So they have to be included until that time?
The intention was they have some additional legislation and they wanted to get the reports in time to adjust. That's close to crossover in the legislature. So I think it's a little bit of a, fishing expedition just to see what they can find. And then from there may or may not want to make additional changes to RSA based on that. One thing, well, I had a couple of thoughts, but Steve, did you have any before I?
Oh, we mean on this policy?
Yeah.
I do have just a few small ones.
Go ahead.
My experience with bullying was certainly there's times when it's a significant issue and concern, but there also have been times when my impressions that were very minor, more typical kid interactions resulted in parents being overly defensive and requiring bullying investigation, which ended up, each bullying investigation for me as a principal was at least 2 or 3 hours.
Yep.
So what I just wanted to do is make sure that when we are doing one, it's for substantial reason. Because it's incredibly difficult. So on line 37, it says cause emotional distress to a student. Well, emotional distress could be I'm annoyed. So I'd rather say causes significant emotional distress to a student.
The RSA, I'm just checking to
I'm
see. if
pulling that right now.
someone's doing the same thing, because I suspect that may
I'm
have
afraid
been
it's in there.
RSA.
Yeah.
I feel like it was, Steve, because I remember wondering about that previously.
It specifically calls out causing emotional distress. That whole section, part B, 1A through F, is the law.
All right, well, in that case, ignore those comments and we'll just move
Well,
on.
you're right. And I had another question, which I think is also just badly drafted RSA. But on lines 45 and 46, we're specifying that it needs to be school property or school sponsored activity. And then we have a whole other section on cyberbullying, which may very likely be neither of those things. And I believe that is in RSA that way. So I'm not sure how much wiggle room we have, but it feels to me like there's potential for a lot of lack of clarity around those two ideas.
I agree that part
Yeah.
F is not in that part of the law, but I'm afraid
I
it's
feel like
somewhere
it was
else.
there and I'm looking, Patty, so I'm gonna stick a pin in that for now. Like I also think that our previous, maybe not policy, but at least in the procedures, that the approach had been something along the lines of, if the incident happens, on a weekend, unconnected to school, and then still impacts the kids' access to education in school, that that's still something we would investigate as bullying.
Mhm.
Does that sound like?
That
So
is,
that's
that
the
is the
other
way it's
thing
been
that-
treated.
Yep, I have some concern about that's line 45 and 46. I have some concern about that language. We limiting when we would intervene, because that's just not the reality of how kids interact. And I'm worried that if we want to investigate something where, they're on Snapchat or whatever, and something is going on, which is not terribly unusual at the high school or the middle school. If this is in the policy this way, and I'm a parent, I would first say, oh, well, your policy says it's school property and school events, and this is not that, so go away. And I could see that.
But then you have contradictory ones.
Well, that's it. So I just worry about that contradiction, creating problems for the investigations and the enforcement.
But it doesn't say and I think that that's the,
I'm sorry, what?
it doesn't say and must occur on school property. And I'm just looking at our current policy.
Well, it says school property or school-sponsored activity or event.
Right, but I'm looking at E. Disrupt or occurs on, so it could be
Oh, I see. So
any
you
of
feel like the
these.
or okay, so you feel like the or at the end of line
Because if,
43 covers that.
right, so
Okay.
if something is happening that is causing emotional distress or interfering with education or creating a hostile work environment. So it could be something that happened on the weekend, on Snapchat or through
doesn't have
text.
Just that.
Okay.
Right,
Okay.
and if the student doesn't want to come to school because I'm gonna see that person who's been bothering me, it is still investigatable.
Okay, I think I take your point. I'll move on from that.
Yeah.
Like
I think
such.
that's true.
Okay. And then I think I had some concerns just conceptually about the false accusations piece.
Which one?
So in section C, like that whole idea about false accusations starting around 127. I'm curious about, I don't know that the language is wrong, but a lot of this, because it's teenagers, we'll say, can get quickly nuanced and murky.
Mhm.
And procedurally, if a student makes an accusation, there's an investigation, and the decision of the investigation is to rise to the level of bullying under policy.
Mhm.
Does that automatically open up the accuser to a false accusation investigation? Because it can be like, there can be a lot of middle space, like you were saying, Steve, where there was some sort of behavior that did make somebody feel bad or unsafe or something, but we investigate and decide that it didn't quite rise to the level of systemic enough or severe enough, but that doesn't mean that it was false.
Yeah, I think what.
And that's what I'm worried about, with that false accusation piece,
I agree, and I think you picked up on it.
right? Because it just doesn't feel like it leaves nuance there, Patty.
And I don't know,
Could we add the word deliberately false? Could we add the word deliberately?
I don't know to what extent there's a lot of false reporting. I feel, based on my experience, it tends to go in the other direction.
I agree.
That students who are experiencing situations don't want to say something. That's what I'm seeing. And I wonder, Lisa, if this goes back to your earlier point about a fishing expedition, to see, is this really as pervasive a problem in our schools, or are they just making things up? I do not, in my experience, think that there's a lot of this.
I've never seen that. But I worry that when you say that you could be in trouble for making a false accusation, that could be an even greater deterrent to people speaking on it.
I agree.
And I don't love that. And I think the political piece, there's been a lot of legislation around the country in the last several years, and it was mainly more starting from college assault investigations
Right.
to sort of refocus on the rights of the person being accused.
Sure.
And this is kind of a trickle down from that
Mhm.
kind of national conversation. So that's where it's coming from, but it makes me concerned that we're maybe taking away protections from people who have.
So this is an RSA also?
What it says in the RSA is that the school board of each school district shall no later than 6 months after the effective date of this section, which is a bigger section, adopt a policy, blah, 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 shall contain the following component. B, a statement prohibiting retaliation or false accusations against the victim, witness, or anyone who in good faith provides information about an act of bullying or cyberbullying. And at the time a report is made, a process for developing as needed a plan to protect pupils from retaliation.
The retaliation piece makes sense.
Yes.
Now it was previous. So I guess I'm just wondering, I'm trying to spitball this. Is there a way for us to somehow add a definition of false accusation that maybe, I don't know.
Well, I guess you don't fill the statement or deliberately false accusations. I mean, I think it needs to be demonstrated that a false accusation was done for harm.
Yeah.
I feel like if we had deliberately false accusations, it's not contradictory, but it does, all of a sudden you have to prove that the accusation was deliberately false, which protects people. That would be why I'd want that in that.
Yeah, and I think that is the direction that I'm thinking as well on this. I guess it's difficult because you're putting people in a position to adjudicate what is or isn't deliberate and what is or isn't false. And that's very, no, I know.
The whole thing.
I know.
You're adjudicating this whole issue.
I know.
And my concern with being overly prescriptive is, Steve, to your point earlier, how long it takes to just do a bullying investigation. Then you're going to have to do an investigation on whether or not it was false. That's going to come up as you look at what's going on anyway. But I think if you add to line 127, retaliation or deliberately false accusations, and then put it again in 133 and 136, any time in that section it talks about false accusations, and again on 140, deliberately false.
Mhm.
I think if we just repeat it as deliberately false,
I think that would help a lot
Yeah,
in
no,
terms of signaling.
and the
Because you
law
don't want
talks,
to, yeah.
the law talks also about in good faith, because this is no different than what is it, the Good Samaritan? If you think somebody is in trouble and you're trying to help them, you might think that something is bullying, and in fact, it's just the way people joke with each other, which might not be healthy, but that's
right.
neither one is bothered. So maybe if we add that word into that section, anytime it's false, it's deliberately false.
I think that works, Patty.
Yeah, no, I think
And there's several references, so we would just say that every instance of false accusation, we would add deliberately before.
Yep.
And I'm really glad you picked up on that, Lisa, because I absolutely agree. I think it would reduce people being willing to do people bullying when clearly you do not want to.
Yeah, and I think what you said earlier too is true. There's a lot of situations, especially because part of this is kids are learning how to behave. And maybe not all of them are learning at the right.
Nor do you want any time an accusation is made, well, I mean, I had a number of bullying situations where they're clearly disciplinary situations.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, they did not rise to bullying, but it didn't mean that the accusation was false. And then I just didn't identify it as.
No, I agree.
Bullying.
And I think we just want, and I also feel like in the education piece, try to make sure that we stress to students or staff that we're not trying to discourage the reporting of those concerns when they feel like that.
And so I just wanted to point out the lines where I found it so that I'm not missing anything. 127,
Mhm.
133,
136.
136, 140, and then also again on 149. I think those are the ones.
I think so. There might have been a reference lower down where we're talking about what actions you take. Investigations, but I'm just looking right now. I can do this more quickly on word search too. But I think that solves my concerns as best we can, given that we have to the update.
I don't know if the board would be comfortable doing this in a single read, because what that would allow us to do as a district is to make sure that this is the version that the staff is reading and taking the test on. This is the version that we're sharing with families and students. This is the version that the administrators will be following to do any investigations this year, so that we can start out the gate with the right information.
I don't know why, I think it'd be to our disadvantage not to have it ready for the start of school, because you can have a bullying investigation on day one.
Absolutely.
Is it on the agenda? It's not on the agenda tonight.
I think it is.
I'm happy to see where the board sits with this. I do worry a little bit because there are some substantial changes to this policy about not wanting to steamroll it through. But if people are comfortable doing it on single read, I don't object. I think the other piece, Patty, that's come up when we've talked about this before is kind of the more kind of restorative practices. I think there's been many conversations the board has had over the last several years about, can we have some amount of education and repair as part of our response, which isn't what's really being mandated by RSA, but more our, kind of local approach to this.
Right, it's on line 353. It is on tonight's agenda, just as
Yeah, I thought it was.
Um,
My brain is a little.
remedial measures are in here, so.
Yeah.
361 through 369, so that's in there. Which is the way we would rather go.
Right, but what I'm saying is there's not really like that. The remedial measures are very much RSA measures. I think what we've had conversations about is when there are incidents, can we have conversations that are broader in the school community,
Mhm.
broader with groups of kids? Do we feel, where do you think that falls in policy? I don't know if that's covered. But I also don't want to dictate everything in the policy.
And I think that that's the sweet spot right there. And I think that as we put this into the education piece, which is right the next section, starting on line 400.
Yeah,
Not only are you saying here, read this, but these are the conversations that they would have in advisory at the high school, that they would have through doing the character strong kinds of things that would sort of come in to the conversation in different ways, so that you can have those remedial pieces and restorative justice practices embedded in everything, not just bullying.
Yeah, I hear you, but I think it's not a character strong question. I think it's more of something happens that's egregious. Whether or not it rises to the level of giving consequences to the student, many other students in the school have witnessed it or know about it. Are there moments when we would want to facilitate conversations with groups of students, with a whole grade, with a whole class?
But it does say, but are not limited to.
I know, but I think what we've had conversations about when this has come up before is at least signaling that that's something that we'd like to see happen when appropriate or possible.
And I know that, for instance, athletics has done that, and that's not even, during
That's a
the bell
step.
to bell, like they have pulled students together
Yep.
and had conversations about that. And I know there were a couple instances last year at the high school with groups of students that they've had that sort of a situation. I think that's just good educational practice or good instructional practice. So I don't know that it needs to be spelled out. But it is certainly something that as an administrative group, we can discuss.
Okay.
Okay. Supporting the standard.
Okay.
So yes, it's on tonight, so.
Okay. I mean, I think if we were going to try to address that, I wonder about in that list under 369, there would be a way to add a phrase that says, education or I don't know. It just,
Corrective instruction, other relevant learning experience, it sort of.
Okay, all
includes
right.
That peer
There.
support group, mediation.
all right. I think I can. This policy just, it bugs me for a variety of reasons, but it just feels like you pull thread. And then when you stop pulling,
Right.
I will say it's an important policy, it's like a thought so, as I said. It's,
Yeah.
it's really challenging.
No, I agree. And I think from a parent perspective and having had to deal with things with my own kids, it's very challenging for me. It's hard. And okay, so I think we can pivot off of that one. So you would like to try to have that be a single read tonight?
It would be lovely.
It
if
is
we
not
could.
on the agenda as single read.
No, but I
So,
could make a motion. It would be great because
Would you want to explain that?
I could explain that tonight, absolutely, yep.
That, because I think just having an understanding why it's important.
okay, but I would say it's like a general operating thing for the next school year. I'm not comfortable like philosophically with the number of things we're racing through in August. So I think I want to try to be a little more tactical next year. Like a lot just snuck up on us. And it's nobody's fault, but it's not great practice to be trying to
No,
get
this
this
one-
much through.
this- Was not on us. This one was not
There's no blame here, Patty, just what we can do where we can. I think it would be good, but this is definitely not.
No, I absolutely agree.
Something,
I mean,
yeah.
You want standard
Exactly.
3 reads to be normal.
And
Two reads. All right, so that we'll try to do first single read tonight. Okay, and then transportation.
yes,
I had raised this question before and I'm gonna raise it again. With this particular policy, lines 32 to 35. I don't understand, just remind me why public schools is required. With charter schools and non-public schools to be entitled to the same transportation. Why, if they're not part of the public school, why do we have to provide them transportation?
the RSA,
We're required to.
yep. RSA 194B2V.
Okay, and then I won't say the rest of what's in my mind because it wouldn't be appropriate for Cameron. All right.
All right,
This is a substantial overhaul from the one we've got on our books, which is why this is brought up. And even though this is recommended, we already have a pre-existing policy. And we might be faced with non-public schools who are asking for transportation. It would be great to have a policy on the record that delineates what we can and can't do and explains that.
yeah, I agree.
Um,
And this is somewhat connected to the idea of, the universal open enrollment. It's part of why these changes were made, was under the anticipation that if there was universal open enrollment, that they were trying to solve the transportation problem from the other problem they were creating.
That would have made,
So they're connected. And I think having something on the books, knowing that this is percolating and not necessarily going away anytime soon is not a bad idea. I did have a bunch of questions about it. And I do think we would hope to limit that as an operational headache and a budgetary
Mhm.
expense to the fullest extent possible under the law. Um, the one thing that does come up for us a solid amount is students with one parent in district and one not in district, and various issues connected to that. And that does come up every year. We have families that will be just in Kittery. It's only like, a little bit from your bus stop, and can you just pop over the bridge? This has happened.
of course.
Okay. So this one. My only question, Patty, was do we want to have this sort of first reading and then let it sit until such time as we actually need it on the books? Because I don't know if we want to open the can of worms of providing the transportation ahead of the mandate to facilitate.
When does the mandate?
There isn't one at this moment for open enrollment or for allowing. I mean, I guess I'm wondering, is there a reason that we need this on the books right this second, or is this to get ready for what we think is coming down the pike?
so what has happened since We have a policy EEA on the books from 2016.
Yep.
So since 2016, RSA 194B2 has passed, which includes that provision about charter school pupils, non-public school pupils being entitled to the same privileges. That doesn't mean we must provide. It means they are entitled, provided that it fits within routes. It fits like existing routes and things like that. It says it right in the RSA. The only reason you'd want to put this on is go through with the second read is to talk about student conduct, like really clean up some of these things, like having bus routes, bus stops. Like, it's just, there's a lot more detail in the revised one than the one we have on the books, which I don't know, we didn't provide a copy of, but it's pretty simple. It's 3 paragraphs and that's about it.
Okay.
Are we currently providing transportation to?
No, but the request has been made.
Transport St. Pat's kids sometimes.
No, the request has been made.
No, it's come up, okay.
So we don't have,
So if we pass this, or are we then putting something on the books that says we are transporting St. Pat's kids?
what this says is that the law says they shall be entitled. Now, the law also says using the same routes, the same stops. That doesn't mean we're now adding a bus. We're none of that.
But what happens with the bus is, at least my experience was that the routes are determined by the volume of kids. And
Right.
the areas, I don't know, I'm sure they must use software to determine.
They do,
bus routes.
yeah.
So if you added 200, I don't know how big St. Pat's is, but I don't know how many kids from Portsmouth, let's say there's 50 kids from Portsmouth who attend St. Pat's. That's going to significantly impact the design of your routes. And the routes will end up being redesigned to include those kids.
And that's my question with that too. Steve is saying is, are we saying by passing this that we are, when we design the routes every year, adding them in and redesigning the routes to incorporate them? Or are we saying we design the routes with our public school enrolled students in our district and then tell them if you live near or want to get to a stop and then want to be transported? It feels murky.
Well, the other option would be to say the closest, but I know you wouldn't be able to do that. So if you had, let's say you added 12 St. Pat's kids, they can be added to a route, and that causes the bus to have too many students. And if you ever were in a position where all of a sudden the route has too many students on it, the district's gonna have to redesign the routes.
I'm looking for the RSA. I can try to find it so that I can read the right.
But you could end up having to need to have, this could impact budget too, because you could end up needing to have them.
So RSA 189.9. Pupils attending approved private schools up to and including the 12th grade shall be entitled to the same transportation privileges within any town or district as are provided for pupils in public schools.
Can you read that one more time?
Pupils attending approved private schools up to and including 12th grade shall be entitled to the same transportation privileges.
But that same transportation privileges for students in our district means we're putting their home address into, our route mapping process and then customizing the routes based on where the students live. So if we're giving people who attend charter schools or private schools the same transportation privileges, does that mean we have to plug their address into the route and their, you know what I mean? Because it could be someone from St. Pat's says, oh, well, I live here. The bus can take me within a mile of St. Pat's and then I'll just jump off while you're continuing on your merry way to another public school in Portsmouth.
And I think.
And then we're running closed bus in a kind of chaotic way.
And then I think that in practice in other districts that have dealt with this, I think it's based on a lot of feasibility pieces.
Mhm.
Is it safe? Is it
Yeah.
cost effective? Is there route?
Yeah,
because the duty is to provide the public school students with
Well, I guess another way to
transportation.
look at this would be. We, if there's a request. Well, we could wait for, I mean, we don't have to contact the schools, we don't have to reach out to them, if we can set up our scenes, and then if someone from one of the schools requests it, then we know legally we have to provide.
yeah. I wonder if we can get like just sort of an impact memo before we move forward with this, because I feel like we're kind of guessing at what it would practically mean for the budget or for busing operations. And I think we want to know what passing those changes and costs before we implement it. I'm just thinking about if I'm a parent in Portsmouth and see this on the books and say I'm entitled to the same transportation privileges.
I don't know that having it on or not having it on is going to change what the law says.
Right.
It doesn't have to be changed from what we've got in place, but,
If there's a request, then legally be required to.
right, and
meet it.
it prevents this sort of like, well, why are they requesting this? Is this you're doing more like legal legwork, and I think, I mean, it's up to the board if they wanted to put this in place, but the current policy is really what's up at the top of lines 2 through 15.
Yeah. We already have a policy on the books that says we provide transportation to and from school in accordance with state law.
Right.
So I guess I feel like I just worry that the more we spell out, the more trouble we're creating for ourselves in terms of what types of requests are going to come in.
There's nothing wrong with the policy that we have. If
Correct.
it's still.
And it's only a recommended policy. You don't even need to have a policy, but it's worth looking at this to understand where the difference is.
Is there any advantage for us to move this forward? One where because we have cited the proper legal precedent, we're fine with what we have.
The laws exist. The policy is not a required policy.
I would recommend leaving it alone for now.
Yes, worth
If we do want to implement all of these changes, I'd want to have a better sense of what type of operational and cost impact we're talking about. Even if operationally, if somebody on their own decides, oh, I could be entitled to busing and calls you, you then have to follow the law to look into that. That is not the same as having something in the handbooks and something that's on the website that says, we're here to drive students everywhere. And I do think there can be murky situations with students that are going from one school to another. And then are we talking about transportation for sports? And there's just a lot of, well, no, that's part of what we provide.
So we can just table it.
Yeah.
That would be my-
Okay.
Okay. Right. So, follow up. I'd like to, I don't think that Byron ever popped in, but I'd like to start with AI, because that's building up tonight for consideration and second reading, and I want to make sure that we're going to start with the changes. And what happened with this one is it passed on first reading, but when it came to the board for first reading, Byron raised some legitimate concerns about the wording and some of the definitions. And he also raised some concerns about, we could have, say, for example, approved use of, I don't know, Gemini, and then they make some underlying changes at Google to the model. And he wanted to make sure that we had language that enabled us to adjust anytime that the underlying model was updated to make sure that it still meets our needs and still meets our requirements for cybersecurity, student privacy, whatever else. So that was the gist of it. I took Byron's changes and sent them to Zach for his review.
Mhm.
He thought that they made sense. And so the language that's added in red are changes after first reading based on Byron's feedback that we would be considering for approval tonight on second reading. That's where it sits right now. So everything that is in black, we approved on first read already. And
And no, the conditions reflect what you just, they're. And then there's still actually the committee on this, working on this.
that is a little TBD and we can ask, well, no, there will be. I don't know if it started meeting yet. I know that Zach.
Not till the school year and started, I don't
Well, I
think.
guess there's a plan.
He has a plan. I want to say, maybe you remember, Pat, I want to say it was Hannah Jewell. There was somebody in high school who was going to be kind of spearheading this.
Mhm.
And then what we did discuss with Zach is having with this some amount of coordination that between the policy committee and this working group. Because we want to avoid future situations where the working group goes off and then when it comes back to us, like, wait a minute, we have these other ideas over here. So I don't know if we will have somebody from the policy committee that we ask to join that group at every meeting, or if we will ask them to periodically provide updates in here.
Is it possible to have, given Byron's expertise on this, Byron, you know, he's not on the policy committee, but he would bring a knowledge base to it. I have, this, I'm the worst person for this.
I am open to that conceptually, and I think the trick for that would be,
Yeah, you can Byron do it.
well, does he have time? And then if we're asking Byron, who's not in this room, to go to that room to make the people in this room aware of what's happening, I'm a little worried about, I agree with you, he'd be great. He has all of the knowledge, and I just think I want to make sure we're trying to avoid something like, you know, for example, with the evaluations group, where I think there was some desire on the board to have it be done at a certain frequency, and then the group made a determination that a different cadence made sense. And then we have to come together with these different viewpoints of how it should work. And then people felt like they had done a lot of work, and then the board didn't necessarily follow their recommendations. Right, so we don't want to do that with this, because I think this has the potential to be a pretty substantial curriculum impact, given how. So I'm open to that. So I think, how about this? I think the actual board seat on that, like, we'll have some sort of conduit. I would imagine at the end of the day that if we agree as a board what makes sense, I don't think that, you know, there'll be a problem.
Okay.
But I'm noting that you're not interested.
What gave you that impression?
What gave you that impression?
Yes, no,
So,
absolutely.
That's fair. So
I would not be the right person for this
Yeah.
discussion.
I agree with you. Byron would be fantastic. And I don't know if he has the time. I think step one would be, I don't even know when they're meeting.
Right.
So,
I don't know if they know they're.
right. And I think that the goal with that is like what we did with the policy when we set it up for first reading is we did include under some of our recommended, you know, things for them to consider a bunch of stuff that reflected some of the, you know, our committee's ideas for things we wanted to have their policy ultimately. So that's in this policy for them to consider. I feel like that should be TBD. In terms of the language for the updates, did you have any questions or concerns?
No.
If you need a translator, I can't do that. I did talk it through with Myron and with Zach, and it made sense to me. Was there anything else about it that you?
No.
Okay.
No.
So I feel like we just put this through for second read tonight, and assuming that it goes through, then this is on the books, and I assume we'd be updating it again after the working group is done, based on any recommendations that they have. And the goal with that, I think, will be that by spring, they would give us any draft language or recommendations so that we could do this in the same process in April and May instead of August. That would be the dream.
That sounds.
And then we do that, and then the legislature will come in and give us something new to
I'm
add.
sure.
So that can go to second read tonight. And that's already in the board copy with all those changes, so it shouldn't require any additional. Okay, so that we did. I think with video surveillance, was there something we needed to discuss on that at this point, Patty?
No, because EEAA, gosh, is being replaced by ECAF. It would be rescinded. And probably gonna get rescinded. Probably next board meeting, so this, you have to put the ECAF in first before we take away. It didn't make it to be rescinded for this
Okay.
meeting, but it'll get taken off next time, so.
Okay.
So we're done with EEAA.
Yeah, that's easy.
Well done. And then homework, that we were waiting for Chris Tebow to get his office unpacked before we started,
Makes sense.
throwing that at him. In addition to the notes that you had from that survey, Steve and Pip and I had conversations with all of the principals to get some feedback on what they
Should
want.
we include that, those transcripts of those, or summaries of those interviews with this information? So we just have that as part of the complete package.
I think that's actually not a bad idea, Steve. And I think we collated it. I want to say it's on the Google Drive, but I don't remember.
You did,
I think so.
you did.
I'd have to refresh my memory about doing that, but I
You
think
got
we
it.
can certainly do that. And I think that what our hope would be is to get some draft language together. And I know it was on my to-do list to collate the feedback from the administrators into the current policy with at least a first draft. And then just hand it to you and Zach, Patty, so that you can bring it back to them at whatever point in your administrative meetings that you have, tons of free time. And then maybe report back to the policy committee with any, changes, or if we'd rather have them zoom in, if they have more substantial concerns and we need to have a conversation. Because I feel like the hope would be to have something solid in place. Hope maybe for this school year, but that felt timing wise a little tricky to saddle, brand new principal with major overhaul in policy. And I think if we can have something in place by the upcoming school year.
I do have a meeting with Chris Tebow Friday, just a simple,
Good.
hi, welcome. Is there anything I can do to help you type meeting? I don't have any agenda items myself that I wanted to review with him. But, would it be helpful if I just bring this up as part of that conversation, or?
You're certainly welcome to. I know that he reached out to everybody on the board just to say hi and have
Yeah,
a little.
that's what I was responding.
Yeah, so that's fine. I want to say it's possible. I mean, I met with him already and did not get into this. I think Pip may have had some conversation with him about it
I
already.
think so, yeah.
But you certainly can. It doesn't hurt. I would say that you don't have to. If you have other things you want to talk about, it was really just to get to know you. But
Yeah, it's just to get to know you.
no, it never hurts. And I think what we'll want to do is, I think, not create a separate working group, but probably try to move drafts back and forth to the admin team so that we're not forcing them to come to a committee meeting or forming a new committee.
Sure.
Maybe if by, I don't know, like early next year, January, February, that process has failed, then we might need to revisit and say, can we have one meeting where everybody's in the room and we just talk it through? Does that feel fair?
Mhm.
Because I don't want it to get lost,
Mhm.
but I'm also just trying to avoid more subcommittees.
Yeah.
Because everybody's busy. So I think so the next steps on that is it's got the summaries to put in the packet. That's a good idea. And I will say, maybe I will try, maybe by September to have, just a very rough draft. And we can kick it around in this room, and then once we feel sort of okay with that, then we can kick it out to the admin.
I appreciate you taking that on, thank you.
Well, I'm sure the first draft is going to be kind of a mess, because I think we got some contradictory feedback from different people.
Really?
No way. Well, the good news is they all had really thoughtful opinions, and the challenge is they all had thoughtful opinions. We're pointing in slightly different directions, and we'll get there. But I feel like the first draft, it will be hard for me to try to figure out what's that middle.
Sure.
Path.
Absolutely.
But I'll take a stab at it. Does that feel?
Yeah.
Okay. So that one is just kind of still in the soup. One thing I wanted to just quickly raise is, the task force that the city has on, food insecurity and school nutrition and school meals has been rolling along all summer.
Yeah.
And I don't think they have like a firm list yet in terms of specific policy changes that they're looking for. And I do think we're going to reach a point where we can be useful for that group to be connected to this.
Okay,
Because some of what they're looking at is whether they're going to change how we bill for meals or change how we consider potential needs of families who don't qualify for free and reduced lunch, but may still struggle to provide consistent lunches for kids. How we want to handle that. There's a lot of very circular conversations where I think at the end of the day, everybody's in total agreement that we want every kid to have food.
absolutely.
No question. But then the question does become, if we were, hypothetically to change our policies to say we will also provide free meals to kids up to some income threshold beyond what you have to qualify for free and reduced lunch, we wouldn't want to pass that policy without knowing where the funding was coming from. And so there's some conversations that are happening to try to get our arms around, well, what would that cost? Is there funds available? How would it work? And none of that's figured out. But there could down the line be some policy questions for us to consider.
And the other issue, and I don't know if it's policy or procedure, but what happens if a family year after year doesn't pay their bill? How is that handled?
And that's been a major conversation in that task force.
Yeah, I know, one of my neighbors is on that. task
Oh,
force.
okay, so you know.
Ironically, last night
Oh,
when I
right.
was walking the dog,
You got it.
she was talking to me about it.
Is it Kate or is it somebody else?
Well, I don't feel comfortable.
That's
saying-
fair. Okay. But I think that those conversations are ongoing. I would say also with crowdfunding, there's already some concern, especially at PHS, that needs to be mopped up so that we don't go through another school year where kids are not able to fundraise for student activities.
And I think that now that we're getting the interim director of finance online, I think that that will be something that she will need to be involved in.
Correct. And I think the course corrections we made the last time were necessary because of some loopholes that wanted to be closed in terms of people representing the school district on fundraisers that the district wasn't aware of. So correcting for that made sense, but it feels like at this point that it's almost swung so far the other way that now we have clubs that are not able to crowdfund for things. And then I think these other few, let's see, so student dress, skipping ahead to E, that one, I think our idea was to hand that off to our new student rep on the school board and take it back to the kids.
I love that.
Because why not? I mean,
Be interesting to see what they thought.
honestly, I feel like they might do a better job at it than we would. And then I think along those lines, if there are any other sort of really student-focused policies that we'd like to maybe hand over to the students to work on, they're in the very early stages of planning Student Government Day. And there was some thought about being more intentional from the beginning with the plans for this year about which school policies we might want students to work on
No,
and to try to facilitate that. I think the AI conversations were good, the homework conversations were good. And looking for student feedback on lunches and school meals and I don't know, anything else that we need to go through. Okay, Taylor, all right, then we already have our next meeting on the books, and I believe we can. Sure.
in our next meeting,